The sun was shining, but Phoebe's hands felt like ice. She stood in her white dress, the one her mama had stitched with tiny pearls before she passed. A heart full of hope beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The church bell rang once, then again. Each chime felt like a hammer blow against a coffin nail. But her groom, Silas, never came. And deep inside her chest, where all the promises had been stored, something quiet and vital broke. The lace on her sleeves fluttered in the prairie breeze. She was a statue carved from shame, her bouquet of wildflowers wilting in her grip. Behind her, the heavy church doors creaked open. Faces peeked out, whispers snaked through the air, sharp and cruel. The preacher stared down at his Bible, his face a mask of useless pity. Her own father, a man whose pride was thicker than his blood, turned his back on her. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His silence screamed louder than any curse. Phoebe didn't cry. Not yet. The tears were frozen somewhere behind her eyes. She just stared at the dirt road, a brown ribbon stretching into nothing. That was the road Silas had taken an hour ago, his horse kicking up dust, leaving her with nothing but a folded piece of paper he'd left in the stable. She had read it, then read it again, and a third time, praying the words would rearrange themselves into something else, something kind. But they never did. They were simple, brutal. I can't do this. I'm sorry. The ink was already dry. The wound was still fresh. The emptiness he left behind was a living, breathing thing. A child's voice cut through the silence. "Why'd he leave?" he asked, pointing a chubby finger. His mother snatched his hand and shushed him, her eyes darting toward Phoebe with a mix of pity and fear. But the question hung in the air, unanswered. It was the question everyone was asking. It was the question she would spend the rest of her life trying to forget. She turned. Her boots made a lonely, hollow sound on the wooden church steps. The petals she'd scattered that morning, symbols of a happy path, were now just crushed reminders of a lie. No one followed her. No one reached out a hand. Not her kin. Not her friends. They were all trapped in their own prisons of embarrassment and pride. What would the town say? They were already saying it. Phoebe walked. Past the bakery, where the smell of warm bread usually brought her comfort. Today it turned her stomach. Past the mercantile, where women huddled behind the glass, their hands covering their mouths as they whispered her name. She didn't look at them. She couldn't bear to see her own humiliation reflected in their eyes. The town was a cage, and she had to get out. The prairie opened up just beyond the last house. Dry grass swayed in the wind, a sea of gold under a vast, empty sky. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't stay. Her legs felt shaky, like a newborn foal's, but her heart, though shattered, kept beating. She was left behind, yes, but she was still standing. She walked until the sun bled across the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of orange and purple. Her feet blistered inside her fine wedding boots. The delicate hem of her dress, her mother's last gift, snagged on thorny bushes, tearing the fabric. She didn't care. Her veil, a whisper of white lace, caught a gust of wind and sailed away behind her. She let it go. It belonged to a different woman, a woman who no longer existed. Night fell, and the cold was a physical thing, seeping into her bones. She stumbled toward a small clutch of trees, her body screaming for rest. She found a small dip in the land, a hollow that offered little protection but was better than nothing. She collapsed there, too tired to even cry, pulling her knees to her chest. The stars blinked on, one by one, cold and distant witnesses to her pain. She thought of her mama, of the dreams they'd shared, of a future that had turned to dust in a single morning. Her eyes grew heavy. The pain in her chest was a dull, steady throb. And just as the darkness behind her eyes threatened to swallow her whole, her head slumped forward, and the world went black. That's where he found her, Dr. William Hale was riding back from a late house call, his horse, Mayor, moving with a steady gait. Suddenly the horse stopped dead, its ears twitching. It sniffed the air, then let out a low whinny. William peered into the gloom, his eyes sharp from years of looking for trouble. He saw it, a splash of white against the dark earth, curled up like a broken bird. He dismounted in a single fluid motion, his boots making no sound on the soft ground. He knelt beside her. Her dress was ruined, her hands were scraped raw, and her lips were the color of ash. But she was breathing, faintly, shallowly. "A wedding dress," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. He gently brushed a stray piece of dirt from her forehead. "What in God's name happened to you, child?" She couldn't answer. She was lost to the world. Carefully he gathered her into his arms. She was terrifyingly light, as if she were made of nothing but lace and sorrow. As he carried her to his horse, he looked up at the indifferent stars. "Lord," he whispered, his breath fogging in the cold air. "I don't know who she is, but you do. Help me help her." And with that, he mounted Mayor, settling her against his chest. They rode into the darkness, the hem of her ruined gown dragging in the dust, two lost souls moving through the night. But something else was moving too, something quiet and unseen. It was the first thread of a new beginning, being woven in the dark. But William noticed something else as he held her. Tucked into the bodice of her dress was a folded piece of paper, the note from Silas. He pulled it free, his brow furrowed. In the faint moonlight, he unfolded it, expecting a simple apology, a coward's excuse. What he read made his blood run cold. It wasn't just 2 lines. It was more. And it wasn't an apology. It was a warning. "Phoebe, they found me. Don't look for me. Burn the ledger. Forgive me." William's jaw tightened. Ledger? Who were they? This wasn't just a groom with cold feet. This was a man running for his life. And this woman in his arms, this abandoned bride, was now tangled up in whatever he was running from. He spurred his horse, a new urgency in his movements. He had to get her to safety. He had to figure out what kind of danger had just landed on his doorstep. The sun was a pale sliver on the horizon when Phoebe's eyes fluttered open. The world was a blur of soft light and gentle warmth. A heavy blanket was tucked around her chin. A fire crackled in a nearby stove. The air smelled of herbs and something savory, like broth. Her head throbbed, her lips were cracked and dry, but she was safe. She took in the room. It was small, but tidy. Bookshelves crammed with leather-bound volumes lined one wall. Glass jars filled with dried plants and strange liquids sat on another. A simple wooden desk was pushed against the window, papers stacked neatly on its surface. She was in a narrow but clean bed, the sunlight filtering through a white curtain. This wasn't the prairie. This wasn't home. The door creaked open, and a man stepped inside. He was tall, with dark brown hair that fell across his forehead. He wore a simple white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms. His eyes were tired, the kind of tired that comes from seeing too much suffering, but they held a deep well of kindness. "You're awake," he said. His voice was quiet, calm. Phoebe tried to sit up, but the room tilted violently. She let out a small gasp and fell back against the pillow. "Easy," he said, moving closer. "You were half frozen when I found you. Dehydrated, too. You need to rest." He placed a cup of water on the small table beside her bed. Her mind was a fog. Who are you?" she rasped, her throat raw. "My name's William Hale," he said. "I'm the town doctor. The town doctor." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Did you carry me here?" He gave a single slow nod. "Found you out by the trees last night, in a wedding dress. Looked like you'd been walking for a very long time." Shame, hot and suffocating, washed over her. She turned her face to the wall, unable to meet his gaze. "I don't have anywhere to go," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. William pulled a wooden chair to the bedside and sat down. His presence was solid, reassuring. "Then for now, you'll stay here." "But her voice broke. "I don't want charity." "This isn't charity," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's mercy, and I reckon we could all use a little of that from time to time." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "When I found you, there was a note." Phoebe's blood ran cold. The note. She had forgotten. "It said something about a ledger," William continued, his voice low. "It said you should burn it." Phoebe squeezed her eyes shut. The ledger. Silas's business ledger. It was just a simple book where he kept track of sales from their small farm. Why would he want it burned? It didn't make any sense. I don't understand," she whispered. "It's just numbers. Corn sales, profits from the chickens." William's eyes held hers. "Are you sure that's all that's in it?" His question hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. She had looked through that ledger 100 times. It was mundane, boring even. But now, seen through the lens of Silas's frantic warning, every simple entry felt like a code she couldn't crack. What was he hiding? And who were the people who had found him? Phoebe said nothing more. She was too tired to fight, too broken to argue, and now a new feeling was creeping in alongside the shame and heartbreak. Fear. She closed her eyes and let the warmth of the fire seep into her chilled bones. But the doctor's question echoed in the quiet room. "Are you sure that's all that's in it?" And for the first time, Phoebe realized she wasn't sure of anything at all. The days that followed were a blur of sleep, warm broth, and the steady ticking of the old clock on the clinic wall. William was a constant, quiet presence. He never pushed her for answers. He never mentioned the wedding, or Silas, or the cryptic note again. He simply tended to his patients in the next room, wrote at his desk, and brought her water with a silent nod. He gave her space to heal, and it was a kindness she had never known. By the third day, the world had stopped spinning when she sat up. The color had returned to her cheeks. She found her voice again. "You're looking better," William said one morning, placing a bowl of porridge on her bedside table. A faint smile touched her lips. "I feel less like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo." He let out a soft chuckle. It was a nice sound. "Glad to hear it." She ate slowly, her gaze drifting to the window. "This place, it's your clinic?" "And my home," he confirmed. "There's a spare room upstairs. You're welcome to it. Until you find your footing." Phoebe hesitated, twisting the edge of the blanket in her hands. "I'll find work. I can sweep, wash bandages, anything. I won't be a burden." "We'll figure something out," he said, and she knew he meant it. That afternoon, a woman named Miss Ruth bustled in. She was round and cheerful, with silver hair pinned in a neat bun and eyes that saw everything. She carried a basket of clean linens and a tray of freshly baked biscuits. "So, you're the young lady the doc carried in from the prairie's edge," she said, her voice warm as a summer day. Phoebe's cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth to try and explain the unexplainable, but Miss Ruth just waved a hand. "No need to tell me a thing you don't want to, dear, but I'm mighty glad you're safe." She placed the biscuits on the table. "There's always room for a fresh start. Don't you let anyone in this town tell you different." Her words were a balm on Phoebe's raw spirit. A fresh start. Could it be that simple? Over the next week, Phoebe found a rhythm. She swept the clinic floors until they shone. She folded bandages into perfect squares. She kept the shelves of herbs and medicines tidy. Miss Ruth showed her how to brew teas for coughs and which herbs to use for fevers. A small, fragile sense of purpose began to take root in her heart. One morning, a little boy was brought in, his knee a mess of blood and gravel. He wailed as his mother held him, his small body trembling with fear. While William cleaned the wound, Phoebe knelt beside the boy and took his small hand in hers. "It's all right," she said softly, her voice steady. "You're a brave one. It's just a little sting, and then it'll be all better. I promise." The boy's cries subsided into hiccups. He looked at her with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Promise? Promise." After they'd left, William looked at her, a small, approving nod his only comment. "You've got a steady touch, Phoebe." No one had ever said that to her before. Silas had always called her delicate, like a flower. But steady? That felt different. It felt strong. That night, lying in the narrow bed in the room above the clinic, she thought about the ledger. It was back at the small farmhouse she was supposed to have shared with Silas, tucked away in his desk. The urge to see it again, to look at it with new eyes, was a gnawing hunger. Was she just imagining things? Or was there a secret hidden in plain sight within its pages? The next day, she knew what she had to do. "I need to go back," she told William, her voice barely a whisper. "To the house. There are things I need to get." William's expression was unreadable. He studied her for a long moment. "It's not safe for you to go alone." "I have to," she insisted. "The ledger. I have to know." He let out a slow breath. "All right, but I'm going with you." The ride to the farmhouse was silent and tense. The place looked abandoned, a monument to a future that had died before it was born. The front door was unlocked. Inside, everything was just as she had left it. A fine layer of dust covered the furniture. It was a ghost house. Phoebe walked straight to the small wooden desk in the corner. Her hands trembled as she pulled open the drawer. The ledger was still there, a simple, leather-bound book. She took it out, her heart pounding. She opened it to a random page. It was just as she remembered. Dates, names, numbers. Sold 10 bushels of corn to Mr. Abernathy. Price $5. It was all so normal. So mundane. Was she a fool? Had the trauma of the wedding scrambled her mind? "Find anything?" William asked from the doorway. "No," she said, her shoulders slumping. "It's just numbers." But as she went to close the book, her thumb brushed against the edge of a page near the back. It felt different. Thicker. 2 pages were stuck together. Carefully, with trembling fingers, she pried them apart. And then she saw it. Hidden between the records of grain sales and egg profits was another set of entries. They weren't written in Silas's neat script. The handwriting was jagged, frantic. It wasn't a record of farm business. It was a list of names, towns, and dates. And next to each entry, there was a number followed by a single chilling word: paid. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The last entry was dated 2 days before the wedding. It was a different name, a different town. And next to it, instead of the word paid, were 3 words that made the blood drain from her face. Jedediah Kane. Overdue. William moved to her side, looking over her shoulder at the hidden page. His face went pale. He swore, a single sharp word under his breath. "Who is Jedediah Kane?" Phoebe whispered, her voice shaking. William didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the name, a dark, haunted expression on his face. "He's not a man you ever want to meet," William said, his voice grim. "He's a ghost, a story told to scare folks straight, a butcher who leads a gang of cutthroats out of the Badlands." He finally turned to look at her, and the kindness in his eyes had been replaced by something hard and cold, something she had never seen before. "And if Silas owes him money, then he didn't just leave you at the altar, Phoebe." He reached out and closed the ledger with a snap. "He signed your death warrant." The ride back to town was a blur. The name Jedediah Kane echoed in Phoebe's mind, a drumbeat of pure terror. A butcher, a ghost, a man Silas owed money to. It all started to click into place, the pieces of a puzzle she never knew she was a part of. Silas hadn't just been a farmer. He'd been living a secret life, a life of dangerous debts and hidden ledgers, and he had left her to face the consequences. "What do we do?" she asked William, her voice small against the vast, empty prairie. William's jaw was set like stone. "First, we burn this." He held up the ledger. "Then, you stay in the clinic. You don't go anywhere alone. You don't talk to strangers. This town is small, but Kane's eyes could be anywhere." His words, meant to be reassuring, only amplified her fear. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the window pane, sounded like footsteps approaching. She was a prisoner in the only safe place she had left. A week passed. Then 2. The initial terror began to fade, replaced by a dull, constant anxiety. Life in the clinic fell back into a routine. Phoebe learned to clean and stitch small wounds, her hands growing steadier with each passing day. She organized William's medicines, her mind finding comfort in the simple, logical task. She was becoming useful. She was becoming more than just the girl who was left behind. But the town hadn't forgotten. One afternoon, a woman named Mrs. Fletcher came in, her wrist swollen and purple. She was a stern, sour-faced woman, the town's self-appointed moral compass. As William examined her wrist, Mrs. Fletcher's sharp eyes landed on Phoebe. "You're that girl," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "The one whose groom ran off. Half the town saw you, standing on those church steps like a fool." The words were like a slap. Phoebe froze, a bowl of clean water trembling in her hands. "That's not your concern, Mrs. Fletcher," William said, his voice low and dangerous. "It's the truth, ain't it?" The woman sniffed. "A man doesn't run from a good woman. Makes you wonder what she did to drive him off." Heat flooded Phoebe's face. "I'm helping Dr. Hale," she said softly, her voice shaking. "That's all." "Well," Mrs. Fletcher muttered, loud enough for the whole clinic to hear, "people remember what they see, and they talk about what they don't." After the woman left, William found Phoebe in the back room, scrubbing a wash basin with a furious energy, her jaw clenched tight. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "I wanted to scream," she confessed, her voice tight. "You didn't," he said, handing her a clean towel. "That's what matters. You don't need to disappear, Phoebe. You just need to keep standing. What you do next is what they'll remember." His words were a lifeline. That evening, she did something she hadn't dared to do since arriving in town. She took a walk. By herself. She passed the mercantile, the schoolhouse, the livery. A few people nodded curtly. Most looked away. But one little girl on a porch swing smiled and waved, and it felt like the sun breaking through the clouds. She found herself standing in front of the church, the place where her world had ended. She walked up the steps, her heart pounding, and stood on the very spot where she had waited for Silas. She breathed in the memory, let it hurt, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said 2 words. "I forgive you." Not for him, for her. It was the only way to let go of the ghost that haunted her. As she turned to leave, her eyes caught something on the ground near the church steps. A small, carved wooden bird. It was Silas's. He had a nervous habit of whittling, and he always carried his latest creation in his pocket. He must have dropped it that morning. She picked it up, the smooth wood cool against her palm. A wave of sadness washed over her, a final goodbye to the man she thought she knew. She slipped it into her apron pocket and walked back to the clinic, a strange sense of peace settling over her. Back at the clinic, a man was waiting on the porch. He was a stranger. tall and lean, dressed in dusty trail clothes. He had a patient smile, but his eyes were cold and flat, like stones at the bottom of a river. "Evening, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "I'm looking for a man. Name of Silas. Heard he was set to be married here." Phoebe's blood turned to ice. It couldn't be. Not here. Not now. I don't know any Silas," she stammered, her mind racing. The man's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's funny, because folks in town say you were the bride. Said he left you standing right here at this church." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. "I don't like being lied to, little lady. Now Silas owes my employer a considerable sum of money, and he has something that belongs to us. I have a feeling he might have told his pretty little bride where he hid it." Phoebe backed away, her hand instinctively going to the apron pocket where the small wooden bird was hidden. The man's eyes flickered down to her hand, and his smile vanished. "What's that you've got there?" Before she could answer, the clinic door opened. William stood there, his face a grim mask. He didn't look at Phoebe. His eyes were locked on the stranger. "Jedediah Kane sends his regards," the stranger said with a smirk. William didn't flinch. "You tell Kane he's not welcome here. Now get off my property before I have the sheriff remove you." The man chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "The sheriff? Oh, I don't think you want to involve the law, Doc." He looked from William to Phoebe and back again. "We'll be back, and next time we won't be so polite." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the twilight. Phoebe's legs gave out, and she sank onto the porch steps, gasping for air. William knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" She could only nod, her body trembling uncontrollably. She pulled the small wooden bird from her pocket and held it out to him on her shaking palm. He dropped this. William took the bird, turning it over in his hands. His thumb pressed against a small, almost invisible seam along its back. With a soft click, the bird split open. It was hollow, and nestled inside, on a tiny piece of folded paper, was a map. It wasn't a map of a farm or a town. It was a map of the Badlands, with a single, crudely drawn X marking a spot deep within the treacherous canyons. Underneath the X was one word: ledger. Silas hadn't told her to burn the ledger. He'd told her to burn the farm's ledger. The real one, the one Jedediah Kane was looking for, wasn't a book at all. It was hidden, and Silas had left the map for her to find. He hadn't just abandoned her. He had made her a target. The discovery of the map changed everything. The quiet fear that had been simmering beneath the surface of their lives now boiled over into open terror. Jedediah Kane wasn't just looking for money. He was looking for a ledger, and Silas had made Phoebe the key. "He used me," Phoebe whispered, staring at the tiny map in William's hand. "He knew they'd come looking. He left this for me, hoping I'd lead them to it, or take the fall for him." The betrayal was a fresh wound, deeper and more painful than being left at the altar. This wasn't cowardice. This was cruelty. William's face was grim. "This is my fault. I shouldn't have let you go back to the house." "You couldn't have known," she said, though the words offered little comfort. That night, the clinic no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a fortress under siege. William barred the door and shuttered the windows. He disappeared into his study and returned with a heavy, long-barreled shotgun, its metal gleaming in the lamplight. He moved with a familiarity that was unsettling, his hands sure and steady as he checked the ammunition. "Where did you learn to use that?" Phoebe asked, her voice hushed. He didn't look like a doctor anymore. He looked like a soldier. William didn't answer right away. He just stared into the fire, his eyes reflecting the flames. "A long time ago," he said finally, his voice rough. In a different life. I was a different man. Before she could ask more, a heavy thud echoed from the back porch. They both froze. William motioned for her to stay quiet, creeping toward the back door with the shotgun held ready. He peered through a crack in the curtains. His body went rigid. "What is it?" Phoebe whispered. "Don't look," he said, his voice flat and hard. But she had to. She crept to his side and looked out. On the back steps, illuminated by the pale moonlight, was a dead raven, a single white ribbon tied around its leg. It was a message, a threat. They were being watched. The next few days were a living nightmare. The town seemed to shrink around them. Faces that were once merely unfriendly now looked suspicious. Whispers followed Phoebe wherever she went. Mrs. Fletcher made sure of that, spreading stories that the jilted bride had brought trouble with her, that Silas had run off because he was mixed up in something dark, and that Phoebe was right in the middle of it. She wasn't just an outcast anymore. She was a pariah. Only Miss Ruth remained a friend. She would bring by food, her cheerful demeanor a small island of warmth in a sea of cold shoulders. "Don't you mind them," she'd say, patting Phoebe's hand. "Fear makes people ugly. You and the doc, you stick together." And they did. A strange bond formed between them in the crucible of fear. They worked together in the clinic, their movements synchronized, their conversations sparse but meaningful. In the long, tense evenings, he would read aloud from his medical books, his calm voice a bulwark against the terrifying silence. She found herself watching him, the quiet strength in his hands, the deep sadness in his eyes that he tried so hard to hide. Who was this man who had saved her, who was now risking his life for her? The second man from Kane's gang showed up a few days later. He didn't come to the clinic. He cornered Phoebe at the mercantile. She had only stepped out for a moment to get flour, thinking it was safe in the middle of the day. He was a big, brutish man with a scar that split his left eyebrow. He blocked her path, a cruel smile on his face. "The doc can't protect you forever," he sneered. "Kane's getting impatient. The ledger, or the map. He doesn't care which." Phoebe's heart hammered in her chest, but she thought of William's words. "Keep standing." She lifted her chin. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man's smile vanished. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. "Don't play dumb with me. Let her go." The voice was cold steel. William stood a few feet away, his body perfectly still, but radiating a lethal intensity Phoebe had never seen before. He wasn't holding the shotgun, but he didn't need to. The look in his eyes was enough. The big man hesitated, then shoved Phoebe away, sending her stumbling into a stack of barrels. "This ain't over, Doc," he snarled, before melting back into the alleyways. William rushed to her side, helping her up. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said, rubbing her arm, but she was shaken to her core. "They won't stop, will they?" "No," William said, his gaze distant and troubled. "Not until they get what they want." He looked at her then, a decision hardening his features. "There's something you need to know about me, Phoebe." That night, after the last patient had gone and the doors were bolted, he told her. He wasn't just William Hale, the quiet town doctor. Years ago, he had been U.S. Marshal William Hale. He'd been one of the best, tracking down the most dangerous outlaws across the territories. He had a wife, a family. "What happened?" Phoebe asked softly. "Jedediah Kane happened," William said, his voice raw with a pain that time had not healed. "I was hunting his gang. I got close. Too close. He found out where I lived. He sent me a message. My wife. My son. They were caught in a fire. Kane made it look like an accident, but I knew." His world had burned to the ground. He'd hung up his badge, buried his name, and became a small-town doctor, hoping to heal others because he couldn't heal himself. He came to this quiet corner of the world to escape his ghosts. And now the ghost had found him. The revelation was staggering. The quiet, kind doctor was a legendary lawman, hiding from a past that was every bit as dark and dangerous as the one Silas had dragged her into. They were two broken people, hiding from the world in this small clinic. "He doesn't just want the ledger, does he?" Phoebe said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "He wants you." "Kane doesn't leave loose ends," William said grimly. "He thinks I'm the only one who can identify him for a string of robberies the marshals are investigating. The ledger is the proof, and I'm the witness." The pieces all fell into place. Silas must have stumbled upon the ledger, stolen it, and run. Jedediah Kane wasn't just a creditor. He was a monster trying to erase his past. And now, he had found the two people who could destroy him, cornered in the same small town. Suddenly, a volley of gunshots shattered the night. Glass exploded from the front windows of the clinic. Splinters flew through the air. "Get down!" William yelled, shoving Phoebe to the floor behind his heavy desk. The siege had begun. The world devolved into a chaotic symphony of splintering wood, shattering glass, and the deafening roar of gunfire. William moved with an instinct that was terrifying and beautiful to watch. He wasn't a doctor anymore. He was the marshal he used to be, his movements economical and precise. He pushed a heavy bookshelf in front of the window, kicked over a table for more cover, all while firing the shotgun in controlled, booming bursts that answered the rifle cracks from outside. Phoebe huddled behind the desk, her heart threatening to beat its way out of her chest. This couldn't be real. Just weeks ago, her biggest worry was the color of the flowers at her wedding. Now, she was in the middle of a gunfight, hiding from a man who was more myth than mortal. "Phoebe!" William's voice cut through the noise. "The back room! Get the carbolic acid and bandages, lots of them!" His order jolted her out of her fear-induced paralysis. She crawled on her hands and knees, keeping her head down as a bullet ripped through the wall just above her. She scrambled into the back room, her hands finding the familiar bottles and linens. This was her world. This she understood. She gathered what he asked for, her mind racing. The acid was for cleaning wounds, but it was also corrosive. An idea, desperate and wild, sparked in her mind. She returned to find William reloading, his face streaked with grime, a cut bleeding freely on his forehead. "They're trying to pin us down," he grunted. "They'll try to burn us out next." "I have an idea," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. She showed him the bottles of acid and a stack of empty glass vials. "If we can get this close enough to the windows." A flicker of admiration lit his eyes. "It's dangerous." "So is staying here," she shot back. Together they worked. Phoebe carefully filled the small vials with the burning acid while William provided covering fire. The smoke in the room was getting thicker. The smell of gunpowder was choking. They could hear the men outside shouting, getting bolder. Then they heard a new sound, the crackle of flames. "They've started a fire at the back door," William said, his voice grim. They were being trapped. "It's now or never," Phoebe said, her hands clutching two of the acid-filled vials. William nodded. He laid down a furious barrage of shots toward the front, drawing their attention. "Go!" Phoebe scrambled to the side window, the one that looked out onto the narrow alley. She could see two of Kane's men preparing torches, their backs to her. Taking a deep breath, she shattered the window pane with a heavy book and hurled the vials with all her might. They shattered against the wall right next to the men. The acid splashed across their clothes and skin. Screams of agony ripped through the night, followed by curses and panicked shouting. The attack faltered. It was the opening they needed. William grabbed her hand. "The cellar! Come on!" He pulled her toward a trapdoor behind the main counter she never even knew existed. He kicked it open, revealing a set of dark, dusty stairs leading down into the earth. "Go! I'll hold them off." "I'm not leaving you!" she cried. "Phoebe, there's no time to argue," he yelled, shoving a loaded pistol into her hands. You know how to use this? She shook her head. Point it at anything that isn't me and pull the trigger. Now go! She scrambled down the stairs into the damp, musty darkness. Above her, the gunfight raged on. She could hear William shouting, the boom of his shotgun, the splintering of wood as the front door finally gave way. Then she heard a new voice. A voice that was calm, cultured, and utterly chilling. Well, well, Marshall Hale. I heard you'd retired. You look terrible. Jedediah Kane had entered the fight. Phoebe huddled in the darkness of the cellar, the pistol heavy and cold in her hands. She could hear everything. The scuff of boots on the floorboards above, the low, menacing voice of Jedediah Kane, and William's defiant replies. It's over, Hale, Kane said, his voice smooth as poison. Give me the girl and the ledger, and I might just let you live out your pathetic little life in this one-horse town. The ledger's gone. William's voice was strained, tired. And you'll never touch her. A sickening thud echoed through the floorboards, followed by a grunt of pain from William. Phoebe's heart seized. They had him. You always did have a hero complex, Kane sneered. Look where it got you, lying on the floor of your own clinic, bleeding out for a woman who isn't even yours. There was a pause. Find her. Tear this place apart if you have to. Phoebe knew they would find the trapdoor eventually. This was it. This was the end of the line. She could stay here and wait to be found, or she could fight. She looked at the pistol in her hand. Point it at anything that isn't me. William's words. But then she heard something else. A faint scratching sound coming from the far wall of the cellar. A rat? No, it was too rhythmic. She crept toward the sound, her hands outstretched in the dark. Her fingers brushed against rough-hewn stone, then something cold and metallic. A latch. It was another door, one that led outside, likely an old delivery chute now covered with earth and weeds. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through her. She worked at the latch, her fingers raw, praying it wasn't rusted shut. With a final agonizing groan of metal, it gave way. Cool night air washed over her face. She pushed the small door open and wriggled out into the overgrown bushes behind the clinic. The fire at the back of the building cast dancing, monstrous shadows. The main gunfight had stopped, but she could still hear Kane's men ransacking the clinic. She had to do something. She had to help William. And that's when she saw him. A figure, huddled in the shadows across the alley, watching the clinic burn. He was silhouetted against the flames, his posture one of abject terror. He was frozen, a statue of cowardice. It was Silas. He hadn't run. Not far anyway. He had been here all along, hiding, watching. He had let this happen. He had watched the town turn on her, watched Kane's men threaten her, watched the clinic get shot to pieces, and he had done nothing. A rage unlike anything she had ever felt burned through her. It was hotter than the fire, sharper than any bullet. She raised the pistol, the weight of it suddenly feeling right in her hand. She thought about everything. The humiliation at the church, the fear, the lonely nights, William bleeding on the floor for her, for a debt that this man owed. She stepped out of the shadows. Silas! His head whipped around. His face, illuminated by the firelight, was a mask of shock and terror. Phoebe, you have to run! They'll kill you! They're here because of you! She screamed, her voice cracking. You did this! You left me to die! I didn't know what else to do, he whimpered, taking a step back. Kane is a monster. I was scared. Suddenly, the new back door of the clinic burst open. Jedediah Kane himself stepped out, a pistol in his hand. He saw Silas, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. Well, look what the cat dragged in, Kane purred. The little mouse himself. I knew you wouldn't have the guts to run far. Silas fell to his knees. Please, Jedediah, don't kill me. I'll give you whatever you want. The ledger, the money, take it. Just let me go. Kane laughed, a sound devoid of all humor. Oh, I'll get my ledger, but your debt requires a different kind of payment. He raised his pistol, aiming it at Silas's head. Wait! Silas screamed, his eyes wild with terror. He pointed a trembling finger at Phoebe. Take her! She's the one who helped the marshal. She has the map. Take her instead. The final betrayal. He offered her life to save his own. The world seemed to slow down. In that single horrific moment, Phoebe understood everything. It wasn't about love, or second chances, or forgiveness. It was about survival. And she was done being a victim. She raised her own pistol, her hand perfectly steady. She didn't aim at Silas. She aimed at Jedediah Kane. But before she could pull the trigger, another shot rang out. Not from her gun, or from Kane's. Kane grunted, a look of surprise on his face as a red flower bloomed on his chest. He staggered, his pistol falling from his hand. He looked down at his wound, then up at the figure standing in the back doorway of the clinic. It was William. He was covered in blood and dust, leaning heavily against the doorframe, but he was standing. And in his hand, he held a smoking pistol. It's over, Kane, William rasped. Kane's other men, hearing the shot, came running out. But they weren't fast enough. Shots rang out from the main street. The sheriff, alerted by the fire and the gunfight, had finally arrived with a posse. The gang was surrounded. It was over. As the sheriff's men took the outlaws into custody, Phoebe walked over to where Silas was still kneeling on the ground, sobbing. She looked down at the pathetic man she had once promised to love, honor, and cherish. She felt nothing. Not hatred, not pity. Just a vast, empty space where her love for him used to be. She took the small wooden bird from her pocket, the one containing the map, and dropped it on the ground in front of him. You're on your own now, she said, her voice clear and cold. Then she turned her back on him and walked toward William. He was being tended to by the sheriff, but his eyes were on her. He held out a hand, and she took it. His grip was weak, but it was there. It was real. They stood together, watching the embers of the burned-out clinic glow against the night sky. They had lost almost everything. But they had survived. And in the ashes of their old lives, something new was already beginning to grow. The aftermath was a blur of smoke, shouting, and the methodical work of putting a town back together. The sheriff clapped William on the back, calling him a hero. The townsfolk, who had whispered and pointed just days before, now looked at Phoebe with a mixture of awe and respect. Mrs. Fletcher even brought by a hastily baked pie, her sour face contorted into something resembling an apology. Silas was taken into custody, not for his debts to Kane, but for his cowardice and for knowingly endangering the town. He was a ghost, a footnote in a story that was no longer his. The clinic was a ruin, but its foundation was strong. With the help of the town, they began to rebuild. Mr. Clay, the blacksmith, forged new hinges for the doors. Miss Ruth organized the women to sew new curtains and linens. The work was hard, but it was a healing balm. With every new floorboard they laid, Phoebe and William were building a new life. One evening, months later, they stood on the new porch of the rebuilt clinic, watching the sunset paint the sky. The air was cool and clean. The town was quiet. William's arm was around her shoulder, a comfortable, familiar weight. His wounds had healed, leaving behind scars that told a story of survival. Her own scars, the ones on the inside, were fading too. I never expected you, William said quietly, his voice a low rumble against her ear. Not here, not in my life, but you came anyway, like sunlight through the cracks in a ruined wall. She leaned her head against his shoulder. We were both hiding, I think. I'm not hiding anymore, he said, turning to face her. He took her hands in his gaze steady and clear. I don't want to spend one more day wondering. Phoebe, would you stay? Not just in the clinic, but in my life, as my partner, as my wife. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. I was already staying, she whispered. Now I just know why. The wedding was small and simple, held in the town's rebuilt church. The sun was shining, and Phoebe's hands were warm, held firmly in William's. She didn't wear a fancy white dress, just a simple blue one, the color of a clear sky. She didn't carry a bouquet of wilting flowers. She held a single, wild prairie rose that William had picked for her that morning. As they stood before the preacher, surrounded by the true friends they had made, Phoebe knew she had found her place. It wasn't a place she had dreamed of, but it was real. Forged in fire, built on courage, and sealed with a love that was stronger than any ghost from the past. When William kissed her, it was a promise not of a perfect life, but of a shared one, a life where they would face whatever came next, together. They were not just two broken people who had found each other. They were two survivors who had healed each other, building a future from the ashes, a love story written not in promises, but in scars. If you enjoyed Phoebe's journey from heartbreak to heroism, and believe in the power of second chances, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of courage, redemption, and the untamed heart of the West. Your support helps us keep these tales alive. Thank you for listening.